Stalag Luft 3 was the German Luftwaffe's most secure prisoner-of-war camp, situated in the pine forests of Lower Silesia, about 90 miles southeast of Berlin. Built in 1942, it was designed specifically to house captured Allied aircrew, the escapers. The Germans had learned from earlier camps where tunnels were dug, walls were scaled, and fences were cut. Stalag Luft 3 was constructed on a deep bed of yellow sand, chosen because its loose, crumbling consistency was supposed to make tunneling nearly impossible. The huts were raised on concrete foundations to prevent tunneling from underneath. Seismic listening devices were buried around the perimeter, installed by civilian engineers the Germans had contracted to make the camp escape-proof. Microphones sensitive enough to detect the scrape of a shovel were embedded in the ground at regular intervals. Every barack was searched at random intervals by teams of German guards with probing rods. The perimeter consisted of two 12-foot-high barbed wire fences separated by a 15-foot no-man's land, with machine gun towers every 100 yards. Beyond the fences, minefields stretched to the outer wall. The camp held 10,000 prisoners at its peak, drawn from the Royal Air Force, the Royal Canadian Air Force, the United States Army Air Forces, and Allied air forces from a dozen nations. Among these prisoners was squadron leader Roger Bushell, a South African-born Spitfire pilot who had been shot down over Dunkirk in 1940. Bushell was a man of extraordinary determination, a former barrister with a commanding presence and a burning obsession with escape. He had already escaped from two previous camps before being recaptured and transferred to Stalag Luft 3, where the Germans fully expected his talents to be neutralized. Bushell had other ideas. Within weeks of arriving, he conceived a plan so ambitious that even his fellow prisoners thought he had lost his mind. He would dig 3 simultaneous tunnels, codenamed Tom, Dick, and Harry, each over 300 feet long, with the goal of getting 200 men out in a single night. It would become the largest and most elaborate escape attempt of the Second World War. Bushell told his fellow prisoners that the escape was not just about freedom, it was about tying down German resources, forcing them to divert thousands of troops to manhunts and camp security. Every escaped prisoner who evaded capture for even a few days drained German manpower and morale. This strategic dimension elevated the escape from a personal quest to a military operation in its own right. The conditions inside Stalag Luft 3 were deliberately designed to break the spirit of the captured airmen. The huts were overcrowded, with 4 men sharing a room designed for 2. The food was minimal watery soup, a slice of black bread, and occasional scraps of meat or margarine. The winter of 1943-44 was one of the coldest in European history, and the camp's coal ration was insufficient to heat the huts adequately. Men slept in their clothes, huddled together for warmth, and burned anything they could find to stay alive. Despite the physical privations, the prisoners maintained an extraordinary morale. They organized an elaborate education program, with lectures on everything from economics to Shakespeare. They staged theatrical productions, formed orchestras, and published a secret camp newspaper. The Escape Committee, the X-Organization, operated in plain sight under the noses of the German guards who watched the camp from 20-foot-tall watchtowers equipped with machine guns and searchlights. The German commandant, Oberst Franz von Lindner, was a professional officer who believed in treating the prisoners correctly under the Geneva Convention. He knew that escape attempts were inevitable and saw his job as preventing them, not punishing the men who tried. His relationship with the Escape Committee was one of mutual respect. He often played chess with senior officers in the camp and knew many of the key escapers by name. This civility did not extend to the Gestapo, who maintained a presence in the camp and watched the escape preparations with growing suspicion. The scale of engineering required for the 3 tunnels was staggering. Tom began from a corner of Hut 122, Dick from the drainage sump in Hut 122, and Harry from behind a stove in Hut 104. Each tunnel was designed to run 30 feet below the surface to avoid the seismic microphones, which could detect digging at depths of up to 15 feet. The prisoners dug with improvised tools, trowels made from tin cans, shovels crafted from stolen iron scraps, and even a homemade drill fashioned from parts of an electric motor smuggled into the camp in food parcels. The sand was so unstable that the tunnels had to be shored with wooden boards. Over 4,000 bedboards were surreptitiously removed from the bunks and repurposed as tunnel supports. The problem of disposing of the excavated sand was equally daunting. Over 100 tons of yellow sand had to be dispersed without detection. The prisoners developed an ingenious system, they sewed the sand into small pouches hidden inside their trousers, then walked around the camp compound, releasing the sand from tiny holes at the seams as they went. They scattered it across the parade ground, buried it in the vegetable garden, poured it into the sump, and even mixed it with cigarette ash to change its color. Every grain of sand had to be accounted for by a team of dozens of men working in shifts around the clock. The tunnel diggers worked in 30-minute shifts because the air quality was so poor candles flickered and died from lack of oxygen in the confined space. Ventilation was provided by a hand-operated bellows system built from kitchen tins, blankets, and bits of rubber salvaged from old gas masks. A railway system was built inside the tunnels using a trolley made from a milk cart that ran on wooden rails, pulled by rope. Forged documents were produced by a team of artists who replicated German identity papers, travel permits, and currency with astonishing precision. Civilians' clothing was dyed, tailored, and aged to look authentic. Compasses were hidden in the heels of boots and fountain pens. The Escape Committee, known as the X Organization, operated with military precision under Bushell's command. In total, over 600 prisoners were directly involved in the escape preparations, making secrecy an impossible challenge. The Gestapo's informant network within the camp was active, and several times the tunnels were nearly discovered. In one close call, a German guard probing the ground with a steel rod punched through the roof of Tunnel Harry, only inches from the main passage. The prisoners plugged the hole with a piece of scrap wood painted to match the soil color, and the guard did not investigate. The ingenuity of the escape preparations was staggering even by the standards of prisoner-of-war camps. The forgery operation alone was a major industrial undertaking. The Escape Committee needed thousands of documents, travel permits, identity cards, work papers, railway tickets, and even letters of credit from neutral banks. They created them using materials smuggled into the camp in Red Cross parcels and by bribing the less scrupulous guards. The printing was done on a makeshift press made from parts of a gramophone. The ink was manufactured from boot polish and dye extracted from colored paper. The signatures of German officials were painstakingly copied by prisoners who had been artists in civilian life. The maps that the escapees would carry were drawn on tissue paper and hidden inside chessboards and the hollowed-out handles of toothbrushes. The civilian clothes were a particular challenge. RAF battle dress had to be dyed, restitched, and aged to pass as German civilian clothing. The buttons had to be replaced with German-made buttons, the linings had to be altered to match German manufacturing standards, and every garment had to be subtly distressed to look like it had been worn for months. The compasses were tiny, delicate instruments hidden inside the heels of boots or in pens. The food rations for the escape were concentrated into high-calorie blocks that could be carried without arousing suspicion. The Germans knew that an escape attempt was being prepared. The sheer scale of activity could not be hidden, but they never knew exactly where or when it would come. By March 1944, after more than a year of continuous digging, Tunnel Harry had reached the edge of the camp's perimeter, 336 feet from the trapdoor in Hut 104 to the safety of the forest beyond. But there was a critical problem. The planned exit point had fallen 20 feet short of the tree line, still within view of the guard towers. Bushell made the difficult decision on March 24 that they could wait no longer. The night chosen for the breakout was cold and moonless, perfect conditions for evasion. The break began at 2130 hours, immediately after the evening roll call. The first man through the trapdoor found himself in an open space between the fence and the trees, a potentially fatal error. The delay caused by this miscalculation would prove catastrophic. Each man was comprehensively kitted out with forged identity papers, civilian clothes painstakingly dyed or made from RAF uniforms, forged travel permits bearing official-looking stamps, and detailed maps of the railway system. The escape plan called for 200 men to pass through the tunnel in a single night, but the process was agonizingly slow. The trolley system that carried each man through the tunnel had to be pulled back by a rope for the next escapee. Only 3 men emerged every hour. The tension inside Hut 104 was palpable as dozens of men waited in near-total darkness, listening for the signal from the tunnel exit, a tug on a string that meant the coast was clear. At 0455 hours, as the 77th man was preparing to enter the tunnel, disaster struck. A guard patrolling the perimeter noticed movement in the snow near the tree line. The guard stopped, stared, and then raised his rifle. The 76th escapee had emerged directly into the beam of a searchlight. The alarm was raised within seconds. Klaxons blared across the compound. Searchlights stabbed across the yards. Machine guns opened fire from the towers. The 77th man scrambled back through the trapdoor just as guards burst into Hut 104 with drawn pistols. Inside the tunnel, men crawling toward the exit heard the commotion and reversed course, their escape cut off by the sudden German response. 76 men had made it out into the forest before the alarm, far short of the 200 that Bushell had planned for. But of those 76, the overwhelming majority would never taste freedom. The count had stopped at 76, and the Gestapo was already preparing its response. Within hours, an order came directly from Berlin: all recaptured escapees were to be handed over to the Gestapo for interrogation and disposal. The final hours before the breakout were a whirlwind of last-minute preparations and frantic adjustments. The trapdoor in Hut 104 was disguised as a floorboard beneath a stove. The tunnel entrance had to be concealed every night after the digging shift finished, with the stove carefully replaced and the ashes swept clean. On the night of the escape, the stove was removed and the trapdoor raised at 2,130 hours. The first men through climbed down a rope ladder into the narrow tunnel, then crawled forward on their bellies, pulling their escape kits behind them. The tunnel was so cramped that men could barely move their arms. It was just 2 feet square, barely enough for a man to crawl through. At the far end, they emerged into a dark, snowy forest, disoriented and shivering after the claustrophobic crawl. The escapees were assigned to groups of 2 or 3, each with a specific destination and cover story. Some would travel by train, posing as foreign workers; others would walk across the countryside, aiming for neutral territory. The intended destinations included Switzerland, Sweden, and the Baltic ports where they might stow away on neutral ships. The escape committee had prepared detailed timetables for each man, noting which trains to catch, which stations to avoid, and which border crossings were least guarded. The evacuation of 76 men proceeded with clockwork precision for over 7 hours. Many escapees reached the local railway station at Sagan before the alarm was raised. A few even bought tickets and boarded trains that would carry them deep into Germany before the Gestapo closed the net. Had the guard not spotted movement at 0455, another 30 or 40 men might have escaped. The aftermath of the Great Escape was one of the darkest chapters of the Second World War. Hitler was initially furious upon learning of the breakout and wanted every recaptured officer shot as an example. Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler ultimately ordered the execution of 50 of the escapees, a direct and deliberate violation of the Geneva Convention, which protected prisoners of war from summary execution. Over the following 2 weeks, Gestapo squads systematically murdered the recaptured airmen at locations across Germany. The standard lie was that they had been shot while trying to escape again, a transparent fabrication that fooled no one in the international community. Roger Bushell was among the first to be executed, shot near Saarbrücken on March 29, just 5 days after the breakout. Upon learning of the murders, the British government declared that those responsible would be held personally accountable after the war. The executed men came from 11 different nations, 20 British, 6 Canadian, 6 Polish, 5 Australian, 3 South African, 2 New Zealanders, 2 Norwegian, 1 Belgian, 1 Czechoslovak, 1 French, 1 Greek, and 1 Lithuanian. Each had been a volunteer flyer who had already survived being shot down and imprisoned only to be murdered in cold blood. The 3 men who successfully reached neutral territory were Per Bergsland and Jens Muller, 2 Norwegian airmen who made it to Sweden by railway, and Bram van der Stock, a Dutchman who traveled across Germany by train and then walked across the Pyrenees into Spain, eventually reaching England via Gibraltar. 15 of the recaptured men were returned to Stalag Luft 3 after being interrogated. The remaining 8 were sent to other prisoner-of-war camps or to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. After the war, a special investigation by the Royal Air Force Special Investigation Branch tracked down the Gestapo officers responsible for the murders. Several were tried and executed at a war crimes trial held in Hamburg in 1947. The Great Escape remains a testament to human ingenuity, the will to resist, and the deep bonds of camaraderie forged in captivity. The 1963 film starring Steve McQueen immortalized the story in popular culture, though it took significant artistic liberties. The true story is even more remarkable, a testament to what men will endure and risk for the simple, profound desire to be free. The escape claimed the lives of 50 men, But their sacrifice was not in vain. The Great Escape tied down thousands of German troops during the manhunt and became a symbol of defiance that continues to inspire generations. The execution of the 50 recaptured officers was a war crime that the German High Command tried to conceal. The victims were taken to remote locations, forests, rural police stations, and Gestapo offices, and shot with the official explanation that they were killed while resisting arrest or attempting another escape. The bodies were cremated to destroy evidence. The International Red Cross and the Protecting Power, Switzerland, were informed that the men had been killed in escape attempts, but Allied intelligence quickly gathered evidence that pointed to mass murder. The camp commandant, von Lindner, was horrified when he learned of the executions and wrote a letter of protest to his superiors, risking his own life in the process. He was removed from his post and spent the rest of the war under investigation. After the war, the British government launched Operation Select, a special investigation to identify and bring the perpetrators to justice. The investigation tracked down 17 Gestapo officers directly involved in the murders. 13 were executed, 1 committed suicide, and 3 were sentenced to long prison terms. The trial was held in Hamburg in 1947 and was one of the first war crimes trials to focus on the murder of prisoners of war. The Great Escape had a lasting impact on the treatment of prisoners of war. The Geneva Convention was subsequently strengthened to require that all recaptured prisoners be returned to military custody rather than being handed over to the Gestapo or similar security forces. The legacy of the 50 murdered airmen is preserved at the RAF Stalag Luft 3 Memorial in London, which bears their names and stands as a reminder of the price of freedom.